Aloha and welcome to Figments, the Power of Imagination. I'm your host, Dan Fig. Yes, people really call me that, Leaf. And this is a show that's intended to entertain and inspire. Today, I think we're going to do both, but especially inspire. I'm already getting chicken skin, as we say in Hawaii, thinking about it, because it's going to be a good and important episode with a new friend that I made through the same reunion that I talked about 2 weeks ago on my prior show. And my guest today, as we talk about truly loving one's enemy, is Guy Reuters. Welcome, Guy, and aloha. Guy, let me remind you, you know this kind of how we connected. I went to the reunion and saw former Lieutenant Trish York, who's now a retired colonel, which makes me old. And through her, I met her mom's friend, C.B. Long, and then he insisted that I talk to you. We talked, and we thought we had something in common, and in fact, we do have something in common, and that's that we both have an interest in forward air control. And I FAC'd in two airplanes, and darn proud of both of them. Well, I shouldn't be proud of them. I've flown the OV-10 and the F-16, and a little bit of combat in the F-16. What I learned was he had been a forward air controller too, and we were going to talk about that, right, Guy? That was the idea.
Yep. Good.
So then we met, and we met via Zoom, and talked about your extraordinary life. I have to say, if we took our two resumes up through age 22, yours would be the polar opposite of mine. You did pretty well in school and life, right?
Fair. Yeah, main thing is still alive, like my daughter says, I'm alive, so
yeah.
Pretty good.
But you were an Eagle Scout. You were a top student at the Air Force Academy. The Air Force Academy wouldn't even let me through the gate to sell pizza if you did that then. But you did. You were very successful. No denying.
I had good education. Very lucky. Got into the Air Force and pilot training and so on, and did pretty good there. Had I was very, very lucky to get into pilot training because out of the academy, I got into what they call the Purdue program, which was
right.
a 7-month master's degree, which led me right into pilot training so I could go to Vietnam without having to go through 4 or 5 years of an engineering assignment in the military.
So in other words, because of let me see if I've got this right, Guy, because of your excellence in your engineering studies, you were the top engineering grad in your class. You were almost deemed too smart to be a pilot, if I got that right.
No, that's not right. But if you they had a Purdue program, which they call the astronaut program, which let you go to get a master's degree out of the academy in a 7-month accelerated program at Purdue, which they actually came and taught us some of their courses in our senior year at the academy. So then you could have a master's degree and then go right to pilot training and right to combat if you chose. And then that would give you very early on in your career a master's degree in engineering. This was astronautical engineering, which was space flight. And then you had a pilot training and hopefully some experience in fighter units. So then that would put you in a fast track for the astronaut program. That's the kind of things they were looking for, is fighter experience and good education in engineering. And because of this Purdue program, they were going to get us a master's degree before we went to pilot training.
So you did that. You went to pilot training. And while those plans are all contingent on the needs of the Air Force, you did well enough in pilot training to wind up in single-seat F-100 class, training in the Hun, as it's known. And right. So that, like I said, it's performance-based. But then that's where the journey really took a transition. And, here's a picture of you as a cadet and then as a young F-100 lieutenant pilot, and you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and whatever. You look like a young gun. You were a young gun. but life was going to take a transition very quickly that I wonder if you anticipated, because you didn't go to combat in that fighter initially. You went to combat in the O-1 Bird Dog, which is as unlike the F-100 as anything I can imagine. I flew the O-1 a few times with the Koreans, and there you can see it's a light single engine plane. Later is to the right is the F-100 two-seat forward air control. You flew that too, but how did you wind up in the F-100 or in the O-1 in combat out of F-100 school? I've read that happened. Needs the Air Force. We need a forward air controller. Here's your job.
Well, I did very good in F-100 gunnery training at Luke, and they assigned me to a F-100 unit. They would not let us go to Vietnam in fighters. They wanted us to have a couple of years of operation so that we didn't dive bomb into the ground. You remember how that went? You could easily do that as a young fighter pilot. So I volunteered for Vietnam only out of gunnery school. I said, I don't care about, staying in a fighter unit. I want to get to Vietnam. So they told me that the only way I could get to Vietnam was to take an O-1 assignment, which they're looking for F-100 or not, fighter pilots, U.S. Air Force fighter pilots,
right.
And they needed them for the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army, they wanted to give only fighter pilots to the forward air control job with the U.S. Army so that they understood fighters and they didn't get friendly forces killed. So I said, that's fine. I'll take that. So
we're going to talk about, yeah. And Guy, we're going to talk more about the forward air control mission is what you're doing. And it's important. That's the glue between the Air Force and the land force, the Air Force in the general sense. We've both done that. We understand its importance, and we're going to devote a whole episode towards it. But what in the heck made you so eager to get to Vietnam and get shot at?
Well, I felt like it was my job to get, I was a Air Force pilot, and it was my job to get to the fight. Basically,
right.
My dad had enlisted in World War II in 1940. He was an engineer with New York Telephone. He enlisted in 1940 when he saw the war coming, and he was in the whole war, 40 wow. through 45, and he ended up on Eisenhower's staff for the last year. Okay, and basically as a lieutenant colonel, But basically, the idea is that he said if there's a fight, you want to get in the fight, and so on. So basically there was a fight, and my dad was still alive, and it just was a natural thing for me. We used to watch the Korean War, every day when I was growing up and so on. And I'd read over 1,000 books on warfare. So it was a natural thing for me to want to get into the war.
Well, we've found another kind of bipolar element of our comparison of our lives that converge a bit, in that my grandfather was a Marine corporal, just missed combat, got to Europe, but after the war was over. My father was commissioned right after the end of the war in the Navy. And I had a different obligation, but the same desire that I need, somebody in the family had to pay the bill, pay the tab. Interesting. So you went and you flew the O-1 in combat, that light airplane, over 400 missions.
Yes, that's right.
Not an unarmed aircraft, basically. You had rockets to mark targets, and probably got shot at a lot because the enemy knew how valuable you were.
Took a lot of hits in the aircraft.
Did you? And see, this is all Discovery Learning. We're going to do 12 or 18 episodes. I don't know, Guy, but took a lot of hits probably in desperate circumstances where the land forces needed your help right now. And you finished your 400 missions. Could you have gone home then?
No.
After 400 missions?
No, I could. Okay. I could not have. But I volunteered for. I'd been over there at that time 7 months or so. I volunteered for Misty's. I wanted to get back into 100s at some point. I volunteered for Misty's to get back into fighters. And somebody told me, one of the fighter pilots that I kept in touch with told me about the Misty mission, and it sounded really wonderful. And so I volunteered for him and was able to get into the Misty unit.
And for our viewers, Misty was a Commando Sabre, I think was the name of the program.
Sure.
It was a special program, pretty classified, only volunteers, all fighter pilots flying two CDEF 100s to look in what was known as Route Package 1, the southern area of the Ho Chi Minh Trail right near the demilitarized zone. Full of guns, folks, very heavily defended. So we went from the frying pan to the fire in terms of combat training. They were all volunteers. It's a very unique and distinguished group. There are two former chiefs of staff of the Air Force that came out of the Misties, and other names that, as a fighter pilot, I look at with reverence, frankly. And Guy, you were one of them, and transitioned to the Misty. And how'd your transition to the Misty go? It was pretty exciting from the outset.
It was good. I really, really enjoyed it. I was very happy to be back in fighters. And the mission was excellent. You know, we had a really good mission fighting and interdicting convoys generally in route pack. You know, the route pack really was next to the DMZ, the one furthest away from Hanoi Haiphong on the south, you know, right up against South Vietnam. And our job was to try to interdict the convoys before they went across the passes. There were 4 passes into Laos. Our job was to try to interdict those convoys.
And you would do that, you'd find the convoys, and then sort of what we did in the F-16 during the Kosovo War, once you located a target, if you had ordnance, you'd expend on it. But generally, you would control other fighters to destroy the target and try to disrupt the supplies going into South Vietnam. Have I got that right?
That's correct. We had our own tanker, each Misty mission. We had a tanker airborne for the morning and for the afternoon. We had 2 missions in the morning, 2 missions in the afternoon. We hit the tanker twice over Laos, just across the border. So that gave us, you know, really 5 to 5.5 hour missions, 3 penetrations into North Vietnam, about 3.5 hours there, down low level. So it was a tremendous mission. It really was.
So viewers, that's 3.5 hours walking down the most dangerous alley you can imagine in the most dangerous city in the world. Okay.
Yeah, we had heavy. We were under heavy fire. There was no doubt of that. We're down low, and the advantage of that is that you knew that you were doing something every day that was contributing to helping fight the war, end the war. That was my take over there. I wanted to help end the war, to get back to my family as soon as possible. The other thing I mentioned quickly, because I really felt that the reason I went over there was to show the communists that, you know, we had men that would fight them no matter what their ideas were. Their ideas were, I spent a lot on their philosophy, was to tie us up in wars of liberation all over the world because we wouldn't fight. The U.S. wouldn't fight them. We weren't willing to fight that. They knew they couldn't beat us in a nuclear war, but they felt they could beat us, country by country. And it was all Stalin's idea that from, back in 1920, that we'll take all the little countries and then all the resources will be in our hands. And then Europe and the United States will fall like ripe fruits off the trees into our hands because they cannot live without the resources of the little countries. And that's where wars of liberation came from in their whole philosophy and attacks. That's why it was all over the world in these kinds of things. And Vietnam, one of the things it did was it stopped their wars of liberation because they had to put all their effort into Vietnam. And that let us beat them everywhere else. Honestly, it's
interesting. Yeah. And you and I have talked a bit about Vietnam in the present day. We'll get back to that later. So as you went over to oppose this war of liberation, and we know how unliberating those wars were for the affected populace, Guy, did you hate your enemy, these North Vietnamese and Viet Cong that were shooting at you on a daily basis and trying to kill you, frankly? How did you feel about the enemy?
I was just like most Americans. You're just doing a job. You're in a fight and you're trying to do the job best you can. There was really no hatred at all in combat.
Yeah. And then an event you probably hated. You're early in your tour. You were shot down and rescued and badly injured. And folks, I'll tell you the book to read to learn about that. At that point, could you have called it a combat tour and gone to work in a command post in Saigon or something? were you compelled to stay in the mix?
I didn't feel, I mean, I just wouldn't think of it. You were allowed to not fly over North Vietnam after one shoot down. Okay.
Okay.
And a rescue. But I didn't, and some people did that, but I just couldn't imagine doing that. So I just came back to Misty's.
Okay, folks, we have a lot of folks walking the streets who think they're badass. Okay, need to listen to Guy's story and redefine the term. And I've thought about that a lot. You may think you're tough, but he was badly injured and fought his way back into combat. And that didn't work out so well because on your 12th Misty sortie, I think in the F-100, you were shot down again. Tell me about what were you hit by in the moment of getting out of the airplane? Share a little of that moment, please, with the audience.
Okay, we were hit. It was after about 5 hours in the air. We'd attacked. Ooh. It was under a 1,500-foot sailing. We were the only aircraft in North Vietnam. We went in without any ordnance on the wings, just with 20-millimeter cannon. And the good thing about that is that we could go down low under the low deck, a 1,500-foot sailing. Mm-hmm. No, but of course the dive bombers couldn't do that. So the convoys were on the road in the daytime, and we knew that would happen. So Craner and I went up there and we attacked and really tore up 3 convoys, expended all our ammunition with 20-millimeter, right out of the gunnery school type attacks, right on the deck, knocking those convoys out. Every 20-millimeter was an exploding shell, so you're doing damage every time you hit a truck, and you're just going right down the line of the trucks. And at the end, we're out of ammo, so we figured, well, we'll get a spot. We'll get a fix on there was a six-gun batteries. That was a very good position. They'd almost got a number of the guys we've been putting in. They almost got us a few times, and it was out in a rural area, and it was a very good position. It got the gunner, the guy that ran that gun site was a really good commander, and so we trolled for fire. And generally, what we do when we hit somebody like that, we'd get fire at the end of the day, because otherwise they'd move the gun site. They're very well camouflaged. And then in the morning, first thing in the morning, we'd come in and hit them. We'd hit the gun site. They really frowned on that, but we did it all the time. And basically, we wanted to get their positions on a 1 to 50,000 map that afternoon, the last thing. So we're trolling for fire about a mile out from them, and we're being covered. The tracers are all around us from 57 millimeter, 1837 millimeter, hardball, softballs of fire. We're flying right through this cloud.
Big bullets, folks.
One of them stops in the air and comes right into my canopy. And in fact, at the last second, I ducked my head, and my thought was that I've got to, if this thing explodes, that's it. My only hope is it's a dud, because it was going to hit my canopy, but it didn't. We moved forward, and it hit behind me about 4 feet, which was a saddleback area, the 100, 2 hydraulic pumps, yawed the plane badly and flipped it over on its back and to the end of the ground from 1,500 feet. So we had to eject immediately, and had a stream and shoot, but I had a 7.5-inch blade survival knife, and with the tip of the blade, I was able to cut a couple of risers, got a shoot, and then steered to a patch of woods. And that's a whole story in itself. Just
holy moly. Yeah, that's that's several stories. And the end result, because we have something very important, you know what we want to get to, Guy. The end result is you wind up incarcerated in Than Hoa prison in Hanoi, the infamous Hanoi Hilton. We got a picture of it. Looks pretty benign, and Hanoi is a beautiful city today. I've been there many times. This is not a beautiful place, and very not beautiful things were happening there. And we'll talk about those in a minute. Let me take a quick breather and tell you that I'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Figments, the Power of Imagination. If CB is available, we'll probably talk on February 1st about forward air control. It'll be a little more blind fight, and I like it. So hopefully the audience will too. You've been receptive so far. Before I go on, let me get to the reading list, because if you want to know about the Misties, starting in the middle or at the top there, Bury Us Upside Down is a great book about the Misty fact business and some very brave men doing very difficult work. One of the prisoners who in the Hanoi Hilton was Robinson Reisner. His Passing of the Night was a very formative book for me as a young fighter and then a book that is not at all about air combat, but is about combat and the morality and how humanity can be lost in combat, is about the battles of Peleliu and Okinawa by E.B. Sledge with the Old Breed, a book that I still pick up to be reminded of the nature of war. And your war took a turn, and that turn was to be incarcerated. One of the first things that happened was you wound up with an academy colleague. I don't know if you're in the same class, but Lance Sijon. Tell me, how did you reconnect with Lance in the Hanoi Hilton as a prisoner of war?
Well, what happened was is that it was really a holding camp down east of the Magia Pass, and it was just what they call a bamboo prison. It was just 5, 6 little cells in there. Craner and I were in 2 of those cells. This was a temporary holding camp.
Other pilot from the F-100.
Yeah, a different camp. I was in 6 different camps in North Vietnam. There were 15 camps up there. This one was a temporary camp, the only one that was really a temporary camp. And Craner and I were in there, and they brought this POW in the middle of the night after we'd been there about a week or so. And I saw him when I went by his cell. I pushed the door. We were in irons, leg irons and both hands and legs. And you could only shuffle along there. So taking me out to go to the bathroom, my guards in front, I pushed the cell in, and I saw this skeleton on the floor. I thought it was a kid. It looked like a kid. And the next day, I gave him a high sign, but he didn't respond very well. And it was very just like a skeleton. So the next day, they called us out of the day that they brought him in the middle of the night. They called Craner and I up, and he had a big cast on his left leg. And so they called us in to take him out and clean him up because he couldn't, and take him to the bathroom. So he put his arms around our shoulders, and when he did, he looked at me and he said, "Aren't you Guy Gruters?" And I said, I do a double take, really. And I said, "Yes, I am. Who are you?" And he said, "Lance." I said, "Lance who?" He said, "Sijon. Lance Sijon." I said, "Oh, no, not Sijon." Sijon was a class behind me at the academy, but in my squadron, the 21st Squadron, for 3 years. Okay.
Oh my God.
He played football. Unbelievable that he was in this kind of condition. I could pick him up in my arms. He's probably down to about 65 pounds, as an example. The hip bone was.
If you look at that picture from his academy days, you can see that, he's a very robust, healthy, kind of typical academy class guy. And we only have so much time, so I want to get to this, but get to the point that needs to be made.
Right.
You watched your captors kill your friend Lance Sijon.
They killed him because they just basically they beat him really badly. We're screaming like crazy. We're telling the interrogators he's all solo. And they're beating him on his wounds and so on. He wouldn't give him anything but name, rank, service number, date of birth. And to make a long story short, over the next 3 or 4 weeks, he died, and it was a helpless man, and it was just a terrible thing to witness.
And that's when you hated your enemy.
That's where I started to hate the enemy. Now, of course, we were being tortured too, and torture is a really bad thing. And interrogations and torture, and this is where you can't you can't imagine torture unless you're in it, for long periods of time. It's really bad, and you can respond to that. You can. In my case, it resulted in hating, seeing what they were doing, seeing their whole philosophy, which was, you can't have your own opinions. We're going to tell you our opinions, and you better listen to them. And we're going to use you for propaganda and all this kind of thing. To really see what was happening, keeping you solo or with one other POW, all the things in a communist prison camp, living conditions, everything were just unbelievable. So it resulted in a really bad hatred, worse and worse. And over a period of months, I developed that hatred. First time in my life I ever developed hatred. And as a result, it resulted in a terrible spiritual crisis for me. And
up to that, I'll tell the audience, I know that you were a devout Catholic. We talked about that, but that's kind of contrary to your nature, and it led you to such a dark place that you considered killing yourself.
Yeah. Well, what happened is that, of course, I think that I'm fighting. I think that I'm fighting very well. I'm in a fight against these
Yeah.
communists, and I'm doing everything I can, but I'm hating them. Now I'm hating them. First time I'm hating them, really hating them. And as a result of that, I started getting these, just like it says, when you read about this stuff, you stop being able to sleep well. You're constantly
Mhm.
thinking about how you can get even, revenge, how you can torture them back, all this kind of thing. And so what happens is what happened to me was I started, there was a number of men that quit eating and committed suicide, okay, throughout the camps there. You know, a number of men that happened to.
Mhm.
The conditions were horrible, and of course you just thought it was, the conditions were terrible, and you couldn't take it anymore, which was a part of it, I'm sure. But anyway, the other thing that happened to me is that I had voices talking to me in my head, convincing me that the only way to beat these guys completely was to stop eating. Now, they didn't say you're going to die. You know, the voices are not telling you that, you know, the devil's not telling you that this is going to kill you. But of course, you know that, right? Well, as soon as this happened, and these voices kept being more and more insistent with all kinds of logical arguments, like, look, there's no way that if they put you into torture to meet the delegations or do this or whatever, there's no way you can resist that. You know that the people are going to break down after a week or two. You know, that's
Mhm.
what's going on. There's no way it's going to be different with you. And basically, you're going to have to do that. You're going to be a traitor to the country, a traitor to your family, and so on, right? So that's the kind of things these voices would tell you. So when they started talking about not eating, then I knew that it was the devil. And I literally am thinking things like, Lord, why is the devil talking to me? I'm fighting as best I can. I want to beat these communists, and stuff like that. Why is this happening? And so on. But there's dead silence, right? So these things get more and more insistent. And then luckily, I had good training. I had a little nun
Mhm.
teach me in the 7th or 8th grade that, you never want to commit suicide. I knew I couldn't commit suicide, because she told me you never commit suicide because that's a mark of a quitter and a coward. But the thing that I always remember, she says, but worse than that, it's not just you're a quitter and a coward forever, but you're making your family the quitter family, the coward family. Everybody you're
Wow.
associated with, your parents, your
And so that
brother, your
nun's
sister,
voice,
your relatives. Oh, she was
so
dynamite. I still
the
remember
nun's
Sister
voice
Thomas
replaced the
Ann.
devil's voice.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I remembered was,
Really?
gee, you can't commit suicide. You're going to have
Wow.
a quitter family. So anyway, basically, I
Wow.
said, okay, well, that's. Then I realized it, because I really believe, because my wife and my aunt, my mother were praying hard. They were going to daily mass, rosaries, and everything like that.
Mhm.
Because of that, I was blind to the hate. But then I saw, why is this happening? I realized because of the hate. Oh, the hate, the hate, the
Yeah.
hate. That's right. Hate is a sin. I'm not allowed to hate. I've never hated like this before. I commit other sin, but I never hated like this. This was really a bad sin, really bad. So I felt like, well, all right, I can't, commit suicide. So I got to beat this hate. So I tried to beat the hate on my own for the first week or two. I could not stop the voices. It got worse. I couldn't beat the hate on my own.
Mm.
So I got on my knees and I started praying, literally, like, you hear people talking about, I said, Jesus, you got to help me. I can't beat this guy. You got to help me beat him, and so on. And I had forgotten, I had been going to mass, but I'd forgotten, like, as an example, part of the rosary and so on. I didn't even know the mysteries, but I knew it was 50 Hail Marys with Our Fathers every 10. And I just started saying that and other prayers out of my mind, asking Jesus to please help me to beat this ridiculous voices that are talking to me. And after 3
And you
months,
did.
after 3 months, I remembered being ecstatic, because for the first time in many, many months, I could say, Lord, forgive them. And it wasn't out loud. It was just in my mind, and I didn't mean it. It was a lie, but it was the first time that I could even form those words in my mind. And so I knew that somehow God was changing my heart. 3 months later, I really was praying for all these 22 different torturers and interrogators that I'd
Mhm.
had experience with to be forgiven and to get to heaven. And I meant it. I was really praying for all of them to get to heaven. And that's where I first came to realize that the whole world is God's children and his masterpieces, and we're not supposed to hate anybody, period.
Yeah, and that is the bottom line I wanted to get to. Is where I believe that as I flew combat sorties over the beautiful Balkans and looked at the ugliness that hatred created there, I told myself, in a different, easier circumstances, I'm just not going to hate anymore, because look what it does. Look what it does. So to me, Guy, and again, not to put words in your mouth because you're so eloquent about this, but it's like you got freed twice. You were freed from the hatred, and then about 50 years ago, this coming March 14th, you were freed from imprisonment in Vietnam. And we got a picture of another group of POWs. How did it, we're running overtime? Absolutely no surprise with such important things to discuss. But the moment that you lifted off from Hanoi, how did that? Can you describe the feeling?
We honestly couldn't believe it when we got out of there. We couldn't believe it. It was such a complete. For 5 years, we knew that we were never going to get out of there. You know, we we're going to die up there. Then the B-52s started that bombing, and that did it. That got us out.
Changed everything, and that's yet another show. You may be I may ask you to be a guest several times, and it had to feel real here, where you're actually greeted by your family, and that's a picture of you as a captain upon relief. I won't ask you to tell what that feels like, but to spend 5 years, 3 months in prison, tortured, going through the anguish and the depths of hatred, and coming out to your family that stayed with you and waited for you. Wow, God bless you, guy. It's an amazing story.
God bless you. Thank you.
And I just say that your story got more amazing. You and your wife had 5 more kids. You flew for an airline. You had a software company. Still do, man. I think you said you still do.
Yeah, that's true.
You've done amazing things as an individual, an entrepreneur, a motivational speaker. So let me ask you this. Would any of that been possible had you continued to hate?
No, I'm sure he would have talked me into suicide. Yeah. I'm sure he would have talked me into suicide. He's smart. He's smart. If I hadn't had that training, you know, and if I hadn't had the prayer for me and so on, and we had a lot of Americans praying for us, because the whole thing that's hard for people to understand is, despite the sin, I didn't see it as I'm in the sin. Okay, I had the grace from the prayers, I believe, of my family to see the fact that hatred was a sin. I thought it was just part of the fight. You know what I mean?
Right. Wow, powerful testimony, and much needed in times like these where there's just too darn much hate. We all have, we all have anger. Things make me mad. Sometimes I express it more pithily, if that was a play on words. But there's a difference between anger and hate, and the fact that we somehow are compelled these days to hate people who think, act, look, whatever, differently is dangerous for our society. And I pray that we'll find a better way, because the world deserves a better way, and our kids and grandkids and whatever generation of any of the 8 billion miracles, as you put it, deserve that. Guy, I'm going to see you again. Insist that you come back with CB and talk forward air control and more stuff. I am so fortunate to have met you. I thank you for the time today. Yes, audience, we ran over, but it was worth it. So, Guy, aloha.
About you.
All right.
Aloha. Hey.
Let me sign off with our folks here. Remind you that we do have QR codes here. I'll show them on the screen so you can get a quick look at the playlists on YouTube. We're also available on Vimeo, Spotify, and other platforms. By the way, you got 2 pretty tech savvy old guys here, so don't think you're the only ones who know the tech world. And finally, I want to thank Think Tech Hawaii, a wonderful nonprofit corporation that enables citizen journalists like me with their Think Tech videos. Eric and Ash, my engineers, special thanks to you, and I look forward to talking with you in 2 weeks. Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching Think Tech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.